Good day, everyone. This lecture will deal with contract instructions. We're just going to continue, and we're going to refer to example 2. Most of the information we've already covered, so we're not going to go into detail. I'll just quickly browse through that and touch on certain items. And then we've got 1 or 2 additional items to discuss in this specific example. If you look at the contract instructions given for this specific project, it's a project related to 35 garages. You have the bill of quantities in your module, and we've got a total of 8 contract instructions. Now, as we said that a final account consists of majority contract instructions. So we'll start with contract instruction number 1 right up to the final contract instruction given by the principal agent. Now in this case, the very first one is a contract instruction to omit the contingency amount. As we said, that will always be an omission. Whenever there's an amount allowed for contingencies, you need to deduct. If the principal agent did not issue a contract instruction for the omission of contingencies as a quantity surveyor, you need to create one and omit that from the contract cost. So in this case, it's an omission, and we will carry this total of 50,000. We will carry it over to the final summary in the final account, which we will discuss at a later stage. Contract instruction number 2, it indicates here that to appoint a Sparky Electrical Services as the electrical contractor. Now, we all know by now at this stage, we've got omissions, we've got additions. Some instructions will only have omissions, some will only have additions. Now, we have to include all the contract instructions, even if it's a zero amount, in this case, with a no cost implication. This is an instruction which is merely an instruction to the main contractor to appoint Mr. Sparky Electrical Services. In other words, they should form a separate contract agreement. In other words, it's now a contract, the JBCC contract between the main contractor and the nominated subcontractor. So in this case, Sparky Electrical was selected as the successful nominated subcontractor, so there must be an agreement formed, and that agreement is between the main contractor and the nominated subcontractor. Just for noting that there is no contract between the employer and Mr. Sparky, the nominated subcontractor. So in this case, it's merely an instruction that he is appointed, and there should be an agreement between the 2 contractors. Although there is no cost implications, we need to include it in the final account as an official contract instruction. If we look at contract instruction number 3, we've already discussed that in the example 1, the adjustment of electrical installation. Now all nominated subcontractors work electrical installation. There could be lifts, there could be ventilations, will then be adjusted. We omit what we've measured in the bill or what we've allowed. In this case, the emissions for electrical, there's all your amounts that we've allowed in the bill. And then we add the new and this specific amount here of 91,540. That will be supplied by the electrical engineer. And we've noted before that that 91,540 is now excluding VAT. The electrical engineer has also prepared his own final account. He also issued contract instructions, number 1 till number X. So he will finalize his final account, and on the completion of his final account, he will then forward that figure of 91 excluding VAT, 91,540 excluding VAT. Remember, very important, excluding VAT. So nowhere in my final account up till now we've deal with VAT. It's all excluding. Then the adjustment for attendance and profit. Remember, we've discussed before, if there was no allowance made for attendance and profit in the bill, then obviously in the final account, we're not going to give the contractor any attendance and profit. In this case, yes, the contractor did price it. So what is the amount for attendance? It's pro rata. In other words, what was originally allowed times it by the actual, the final. So originally, he allowed 9,000 over the 88,000 provisional amount, times it by the final will give you your 9362 odd rand for attendance. The same applies for the profit. It's pro rata. And remember now, you only pay the contractor pro rata if he did price it in the bill. If there was a zero amount in the bill, then obviously your final account under additions will also be zero for the two items. In this case, contract instruction number 4, it's a plain, straightforward contract instruction to omit all the rainwater goods. So here, the omissions rainwater goods as items 11 to 16, you add up on page 6, you add up the totals, and that gives me a total of 47,000 rand, odd rand. Then contract instruction number 5. It states that we need to add a half-brick dividing wall in 20 garages. Now remember at this stage, just make a note that there hasn't been done, the work hasn't been done yet. So obviously in that case, I need to omit what we've measured in the bill and we're going to add. Now put yourself in a position that you've got a venue and you're going to install a wall in that specific venue. You've measured the ceilings right through. There was wall finishes measured. There was floor finishes measured. But now we're going to construct a half-brick wall in that specific venue. So we don't need the ceiling for that specific half-brick wall. The half-brick wall will go through the ceiling. If we look at the vertical finishes, the plaster wall, the paint on the plaster was measured right through. You don't need that internal plaster and the paint where you've got the half-brick wall. Same for the floor finishes. You've measured the floor covering right through. So we need to omit it. Where the half-brick wall is going to be constructed, you're going to omit that portion of for the floor finishes. The same for the skirtings, etc., and also for your rhino coved corners. So if we look at the omission, so in the bill, all the items that is now affected by that half-brick wall needs to be omitted. And look at the order of the items. It's all in trade order. Okay, so I have to look where I'm going to construct that half-brick wall. What is the affected items? And then I'm going to measure the quantity. All right, and then times it by the bill values. We can't change that. We need to stick to the bill values, the rates. So that specific omission will give me then a total here of 1,632 rand that I need to omit. Then I'm going to go to the additions. Now remember, you're going to construct a new half-brick wall. So we can maybe assume in this case, because if it's a half-brick wall, you might ask yourself the question, where's the footing? So in this case, it will be then on the service bed. You're going to construct the half-brick wall on the service bed, and remember, you've removed a portion of the ceiling where that half-brick wall is going to go through. So the height of the half-brick wall will be determined, the length times it by the height, and remember, you're going to take that half-brick wall right through the ceiling, let's say by 3/4, that's your total height. So you're going to measure up the actual area of that new half-brick wall for the number of garages involved. Note that in this case, it is just half-brick walls. There's no reference to a specific item, and we can now assume that we haven't measured any half-brick walls in the bill of quantity. So it's a new item. So obviously we can build up a fully detailed description in your final account under the additions, contract instructions. So there's no reference. So therefore the rate must be a rate that the contractor needs to supply me as quantity surveyor, and I'm going to ask him some evidence, Mr. Contractor, how did you get to this rate? So we need to addendum. So if we go to the bill rate build up for my half brick wall, you'll see that will be in the form of an addendum or annexure, and there's your rate build up. You've got knowledge about this rate build up. That is the content of the module Building Economics, where you've learned how to build up a rate for a half brick wall. So you'll apply that knowledge. Obviously, in the final account, you will ask the contractor to supply you with the rate. Give me evidence. Give me a breakdown. How did you get to this rate? And you will scrutinize the calculations. And if you're happy with that, remember the key here is to determine whether this rate per square meter is a realistic and acceptable rate. So if you're happy with that rate, you will then insert it in the contract instruction, your final account. As you've approved that, we accept it, and that will give them the total. All the other items that is affected, remember now, you need to have a corners against the half brick wall, the skirtings at the bottom. You're going to plaster and paint the half brick walls. Remember that the difference between the plaster and the paint is because we're not going to paint behind the skirtings. Right. And all these items, there is a bill rates because we've got as reference to all those items, and also note the order of the items in trade order. So basically here under the additions, it's only one new item. So therefore I need to supply in the form of evidence a rate build up. So in this case, we omit 1,632 Rand, and we're going to add 36,315 odd Rand. So a little bit of an extra on the project with regards to contract instruction number 5. Then item number 6 talks about the adjustment of prime cost items, adjust prime cost amount for lock sets. Now in the bill on page 4, or item 4 on page 8, we've measured lock sets, and there was 35 of them, and the contractor priced that lock sets at the rate of 250. So in your description, what is identified in the bill of quantities is only the prime cost of 150. That is going to be built in your description. Allow 150 Rand for the prime cost for lock sets, and then the contractor price that item, and he will insert 250. So in the bill, if I can repeat myself, in the bill, you will only have the prime cost of 150 and then the 250. Only those two items will be in the bill of quantities. When we deal with the final account, at this stage, I'm going to ask the contractor to give me a breakdown. How did you get to that 250? I know the prime cost is 150, but the difference of 100 Rand, how did you get to that? So the labor and the profit, that will be supplied by the contractor. In order for me now to calculate the new rate for that lock set. Right, so we omit the lock sets, and that will be an omission of 8,750. And that is lock sets falls under ironmongery. Now let's add the new. So the contractor goes off and he's going to purchase the 4-lever lock set at a new rate of 145. So the prime cost, remember, was 150. The actual price for the lock set, and remember that material cost is also excluding VAT. So the new cost for the material is 145. Now let's build up. How did we get to that unit rate? Let's build it up. The material, the new price for your material price for the lock set is 145. The labor, if you look at the labor, there is actually no change in the labor. Irrespective of the cost, you still have to fit a lock set. Irrespective if it's a 3 or a 4-lever lock set, you still have to fit it. So the labor is going to be the same at 70 Rand. The profit will be an adjustment. So if we look at this ratio here, it's the original times it by the actual. So what is the original? The original was 30 based on the 220, that is the 150 plus the 70. So the 30 profit was based on material and labor, times it by the actual, the 215 is your material 145 plus 70. So that will give me the 29 Rand and 32. So if we add up material, labor and profit, that will give me then a total rate for the new lock set of 244 Rand and 32 cents. So that's the new build-up. And this rate build-up is also, it also form part of that addendum, because the client wants to know, how did you get to that 244? So we need to give them evidence of that new rate build-up. Good. If we look at the next contract instruction, omit granulithic to floors and skirtings to the room created in the dividing wall added in contract instruction number 5. Remember, we've added that half brick wall. And we need to add screed with a vinyl floor tiles and timber skirtings. So we're going to omit the granulithic floor covering and the relevant items, and we're going to add a screed at the vinyl floor tiles plus the timber skirting. So let's omit, we omit the granulithic floor covering, and we add the skirtings. Now let's add the new items. Now if you look at the additions, obviously the vinyl floor, the screeds first, and then the vinyl floors, and then your skirting, and you're going to varnish it. But remember, you're going to arrange that items in the right order. And note, no one of these items we have measured in the bill, so I can't reference that as an as item. So in other words, I need to build up new rates for all 4 of those items. All right, if we just go to your rate build-up, there's the rate build-up for all the 4 items that is now new under that specific contract instructions. So whenever there's a new item, I need to provide evidence of the breakdown of that specific item. And remember, it must be a realistic, acceptable rate. So in this case, our omissions was 5,362, and we're going to add 31,280. Obviously, people, you're looking at granulithic floor covering. If you look at that, it's only 28 Rand versus the floor tiles plus the, if you just look at the floor covering, that's a substantial amount. So obviously it will be a significant extra on the project in this case. Then the last instruction is to omit ceilings and cornices to 10 garages. At this stage, people, don't worry about the quantities. You will actually measure that. So you go to your drawings, you omit the ceilings for the 10 garages, you measure the quantity. So the affected items that you're going to omit here is the ceilings. There was cornices involved and also the paint on the ceilings. It just happens to be in this case that the corners, the length of the corners is also 180, the same as the ceiling area and the paint. Remember, the 180 is now meters for your corners. So that brings me to the end of the 8 contract instructions. Now let's look at the summary page. That was your last contract instruction number 8. Now let's summarize all our contract instructions. Obviously, you will be very fortunate and lucky if you work on a contract where you've only got 8 contract instructions. Now, your very first starting point is the net contract sum. Now, this net contract sum is the amount before VAT. It's the contract sum. Remember, your final account is to determine the contract value. So your starting point is the contract sum. No more in my calculations, or nowhere rather, I've worked with VAT. So our starting point here is the net contract sum excluding VAT. And then I'm going to have a summary of all the contract instructions. So I'll go back to contract instruction number 1, and I'm going to omit the 50,000. Remember, that was your contingencies, and I'm going to add 0. Contract instruction number 2 was that appointment of the nominated subcontractor. There was no cost implication, 0 amount to omit, 0 amount to add. So you go along, and right up till the very last contract instruction, you'll omit and add the values. So in this case, if I look at the omissions, I'll add all the omissions. I'll add the additions, including the net contract sum, less your omissions. That will give me a new value for the contract sum. Now the next item talks about the adjustment of preliminaries. In this specific item, or value, there is the original preliminaries. Preliminaries will always be adjusted. There is basically 3 methods. The very first method we're going to discuss today, and that's the easy one, that's the pro rata. The second one we will discuss in another example where we've got the 3 categories, the fixed, the value, and time-related items. And then the third option, which is a quite involved calculation, a fully detailed breakdown needs to be given to determine the amount for preliminaries. Now, for our course, we'll only look at the first 2 options. Basically, one of the 2 is the most commonly used, or I can say preferred to be used, the 2 alternatives being the pro rata and the 3 categories. So let's look at the pro rata in this example. Now, let's go to your adjustment of the preliminaries. So I'm going to compare apples with apples. And this specific exercise or example deals with the pro rata adjustment. So let's first look at your original allowance in the bill. That's in your bill. Again, if we look at that figure, that's the value, the contract sum rather. And in that value, there is the amount of 40,000 Rand for preliminaries. So let's take it out. Let's deduct that. So it's the 1,394,000 less the preliminaries. Remember, preliminaries is bill number 1. Bill number 1, preliminaries, and that's your on-site overheads, meaning that's the cost of running the project. So the contractor priced that at 40,000 Rand. So let's just take it out. So this figure of 1,354, what does that reflect? This figure of 1,354,424 reflects the actual building works, the value of the building works. Good. Now let's compare the final account. Now, where's this figure coming from? If you go to your final account, there's the amount just before the adjustment of preliminaries. Okay. So that's the amount before the adjustment of preliminaries. And still, if you can visualize that and make sure you understand the principle, in that amount of 1,392 million, there is an amount of 40,000 Rand still built in for preliminaries. Nowhere up till this point we've made a reference or we've touched preliminaries. It is still included there. So I'm going to deduct that. So I'm going to, from that 139, so I'm going to get a new value, a final value. In other words, again, that is building work. So I'm going to compare apples with apples now. You can see here that there is a slight decrease in the value. Okay, so we can maybe now visualize and accept that my preliminaries will also decrease from 40,000 to a lesser value, but by how much? So I'm going to compare the original with the final. So what was originally allowed? The contractor based the 40,000 Rand on the 1.35 million. So here's your original, the adjustment for preliminaries now, the original allowance, it was 40,000 Rand, was based on the original building works, times it by the final building works value. So based on our final account value, our preliminaries should be only 39,941 Rand. We've allowed 40,000 Rand in the bill, so we need to omit or deduct 58 Rand 90. I hope you understand this principle of the pro rata adjustment. So let's go back to my final account summary. So in this case, the adjustment for preliminaries, we need to deduct 58 Rand and 19 cents from the contract value to get a new value. So up to this point, although preliminaries is bill number 1, you'll only do the adjustment for preliminaries at the end. If you go to any bill, the JBCC contract principal agreement, we talk about the payment of preliminaries, and there's another clause referring to the adjustment of preliminaries. The payment of preliminaries we cover in the payment certificates, and the adjustment of preliminaries we will cover in the final account right at the end. And this is what we are determining now. So in this specific project, there will be less P's and G's, so we have to deduct 58 Rand. Not much, but it's a negative figure. And then we're going to add the escalation on the project. Now, this is my final escalation. Remember the AF divided by VF, times it by the V, that is that section of work. Now, in this example, the values is given. We'll get to a point where we're going to determine it. Once we've got to this point, the final account, we need to go and calculate the final escalation. But for this example, those values are given. So it's the building work plus your escalation for both the main contractor and the nominated subcontractor. That will give you then a due contract value. Before VAT, we add the VAT, and that will give me then a final contract value of 1.722 million. And then we have a statement that both parties to the contract will sign, the contractor and the employer. And in this case, you will, as a quantity surveyor, you will give and we're still going to learn about that. You'll submit your final account to the contractor first, and he's got a predetermined number of days to scrutinize the final account and accept it and sign it, and his agreement thereof. So we have a sub-clause in my final account that stating that the undersigned agreed that the above is a true reflection and that there will be no further claims under the contract. So once both parties signed this final statement, we will then in a position to issue a final payment certificate. But there's also a clause that we need to take note of before issuing a final payment certificate. So people, this brings me to the end of the example. So we've discussed again the compilation of the final account consisting of contract instructions, and then what we've discussed today is the actual layout of your final account. And this is the final account summary page. If we can maybe just make a note, that's a summary page of all your contract instructions. And also now we've learned that the calculation of preliminaries, the adjustment, in this case a pro rata, and we will get to exercise or example where we're going to look at the second alternative, which is the 3 categories, and also then to determine the final escalation which is given in this particular example. Good. We will then discuss the next example, and I'll see you next time.